starting to put the curriculum together.
Can't wait. And look like that, Dr. Fuller, we're live.
Oh, look at this. Good morning, Mr. Brown.
Good morning, Dr. Fuller. How are you, sir?
Oh, if I was any better, I'd be violating policy.
Hey, so you were just telling me in the green room when we were munching on those red M&Ms, what your course in Montana, and I am planning on attending. Can't wait.
Oh, excellent.
What is? Tell me about your course that you're teaching out there at Will Parker's place in Montana.
Well, yeah. So Will Parker, a big friend of the show, early coin member, invited me to come out and teach a class out there. And as it happens, a good friend of mine from the Bureau, who was in New Hampshire and was really the only other regular competitive shooter that I ran into over the years, retired right there in Will's town and uses Will's range. So they know each other, they're buddies. And so I was like, well, look, if I get an opportunity to come out to Montana and to see Will and to see my buddy, that's a win. So I discussed it with Will, what his local folks might be interested in. And so it's going to be just a one-day gunfighting class, fighting with a firearm at typical gunfight distances.
Uh-huh.
And that's what we're gonna get out there, and we're gonna have some conversation. We're gonna put some bullets down range, turn some money into noise, if you will, and have some good time with some like-minded individuals.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Looking forward to it. So we got Alan Kelly on. Says, good morning, gents, from occupied Virginia. Will Rhodes is on from Missouri. He has coin number 2269. Dr. Fuller, all the kids are talking about it. What is this coin number stuff about?
Oh, that is a physical indication of your mental acuity. That is a membership token one receives when joining the American Warrior Society and receiving all the benefits thereof.
I went to the P.O. box the other day, Dr. Fuller, and I opened it up and at the AWS P.O. box. And we had a new member that joined last fall in Bulgaria. Like I said, we're very blessed to have members all over the world, even in one or two in Russia. And so I shipped off the coin to Bulgaria in August of last year, forgot all about it. The other day it was in the thing. So here we are 8 months later. It has come all the way back to me here in Cumberland County, Tennessee.
Oh, no.
Returned to sender. I'm like, what story would this thing tell if it could tell a story?
Were you able to get in touch with the member? And
I'm going to shoot him an email and like, hey, man, they didn't like the address you gave me. But it just goes to show, man, I mean, there's no geographical boundary for good men and women. You know what I mean?
It's very true. It's very true. And, this is something that I think we often lose, especially in law enforcement. Because when we deal with people, we deal with them at their worst, right? I mean, professionally, you run into criminals, witnesses, and victims, generally speaking. And we lose sight of the fact that the vast, vast, vast majority of people in this world, not just in our neighborhoods or in our local communities, but in this world, are good people. They just want to get up. They want 3 hots. They want better life for their kids. They don't want to be victims of criminal predation. They don't want the government overly involved in their lives. They just want to do good and move on in this world. And that doesn't matter about lines drawn on a map largely by bureaucrats that really don't care about you as an individual. So Bulgaria, and I'm sure that most of the people in Bulgaria want the same things, generally speaking, that you and I want. So it's great to hear that folks like that have found out about the American Warrior Society and are adopting those same kind of attitudes and saying, look, I want to join this organization because it has information that I want and people that I enjoy associating with.
Yeah. And shout out to one, I was emailing with one of our members yesterday who's in Ireland. And we were chatting back and forth relative to the immigration crisis in Europe, right? And he said, what they're seeing isn't so much the sub-Saharan Africans and the Middle Eastern folks that seem to be swooping across mainland Europe. They have the Ukrainian war refugees. And the only rub relative to these people that are fleeing, Russian invasion is it's really a problem created by their own government. And that is too many handouts. Ireland already has a problem with poverty and inequality. And then you're bringing these folks in and going, here's your house to live in. Here's your checks and all this other stuff. And they're seeing the same, this gentleman was telling me, he says, we're seeing this problem where they're getting so much money, they don't want to work.
Sure.
And I'm sure they were hardworking people over there, but you're disincentivizing hard work, right?
Hunger is a hell of an incentive.
Yes.
And you and I have both been to national parks that are all around the country, and there's signs everywhere. Don't feed the bears, right?
Correct.
Remember Yogi Bear? That was kind of the baseline perspective of that show was, the bear wanted to eat human food. Why don't you feed the bears? Well, they become dependent on it, right? They decide, well, why do I have to go hunt or dig up a tree or knock over a honey hive, beehive?
Get stung a million times.
Right,
Why would I do
I
that?
can just go over here and get fed for free. And people are smarter than bears for the most part. They're going to figure this out.
But humans respond to incentives.
Yes.
Yeah. And we have to be careful what message we're sending. But anyway, before we go much further, we got a show this morning. Dr. Fuller and I are just going to chat for just I don't know, we'll take it as long as we need to take it, but relative to what has happened over the weekend, a major escalation in the conflict in the Middle East. And before we get into that, I want to tell you that I'm joined by my good friend, Dr. Fuller. He's the award-winning author of No Safe Alternatives, Improving How We Teach Our Cops to Kill. This is a republication of an earlier work, so thank God it's back in circulation. But his newest, perhaps, book is Painting Over Rust, Stories from a 20-Year Odyssey in the FBI. Very meaty tome. There's the esteemed Dr. Fuller on the back. Absolutely amazing books from someone that I love and respect greatly. But if you're just interested in raising the testosterone level and chasing mom around the couch for a while, then I encourage you to pick up my memoir. What is this called here? Oh, yeah, On Violence and Varietals.
Yeah, so May 8th, the Pulitzer Committee is going to decide whether or not I deserve a Pulitzer for Painting Over Rust. So
I'm so excited for you, brother. So excited for you.
Yeah,
Dr. Gordon Botson is on. Speaking of doctors.
Excellent.
Do you have any inside baseball on the Pulitzer issue?
No, God, no. Nobody knows who I am. They're not going to give me a Pulitzer, but by God, I'm in the running.
Hey,
I'm going to milk it for all it's worth.
Put that on your CV, brother.
Oh, it's on. Believe you me.
My brother Jeff is on, says watching from the old YouTubes. Let's see, Derek Gibson is on from North Carolina. So Dr. Fuller, jumping into this, man, what happened over the weekend?
Well, the Iranians decided they hadn't been getting enough attention, so they decided to attack Israel, which is always a less than wise decision by anyone that's done it, historically speaking. And this was in response to the Israelis having hit the Iranian embassy in Damascus and killed a few Iranian
two generals and some senior officers.
Yeah.
And did you hear Israel's rationale for that? Because normally these places are off limits, right? These consulates.
Yeah, they normally are, but there are exceptions.
Yeah, and what I read that they said, and again, this is a very fluid thing, so we're not going to say 137 missiles and drones were fired. I'm not talking about that, because every time I try to pin a number down, it's like trying to nail Jello to the wall. It's like, oh, now it's over 300. So aside from that, what I'm being told, Dr. Fuller, is because of the presence of these military personnel, you just remove the neutrality from that consulate. That's what I'm hearing. Well,
end of the day, they're going to throw word salad at it. They had an opportunity to kill these two guys. They killed them.
Yeah.
And yes, you can say that it's sovereign territory, which by international treaty embassies are. It's not necessarily neutral territory, so that's a bit of a stretch. But
if I could pause you right there, that's an excellent point. And that point is that soil that that Israeli airstrike landed on is Iranian soil, which is why they're saying that, hey, you attacked Iranian soil, right?
Right. And you have to see the irony in Iran hiding behind embassy protections, given their actions in 1979, right? When they stormed the U.S. embassy and took a bunch of our embassy personnel hostage for 444 days. So they don't get a lot of sympathy from me on that one, particularly when you consider that the Iranians and the Israelis have had a shadow war going for decades. I mean, they've been tit for tatting each other, killing off one another's people forever. The Iranians have chosen until now to use proxies, right? So they use Shia terrorists, terrorists by our definition, freedom fighters by others' definition. They use the Houthis, they use the Lately, they use the Palestinians. They'll use anybody that'll pick up a rock and throw it.
Mm-hmm.
And the Iranians have been on the receiving end of Israeli realpolitik. I mean, the Israelis don't shy away from whacking people. Now, they don't go in for carpet bombing, generally speaking. I mean, you can make the argument, I suppose, that Gaza flies in the face of that. But generally speaking, the Israelis are very, very precise in what they do. So they don't decide that, okay, the entire government of Iran is at fault. They decide that Abu Richard Brown is at fault for this attack. And they go and they kill Abu Richard Brown. Now, they may do it by just targeted assassinations. They may do it by car bomb. They may do it by, missile, drone. They killed a guy called the Engineer. And I think I've spoken about this on the show before. When I was in the Middle East, when I was living in Egypt, and he was running a bombing campaign that was killing all kinds of people all around Israel. And he was out of Gaza. And they killed him by swapping out his cell phone. And when they got him on the phone, the rumor was that the head of Mossad called him. And as soon as he heard him, he asked if it was, asked for him by name. And he said, yeah. And he pushed the button, and a couple grams of bang in the cell phone went off. And as there's 6-7 grams of explosive in a hand grenade. It doesn't take a whole lot.
No.
And that was the end of him. Very targeted, very specific. So that's kind of the Israeli way of doing things to date. But they don't shy away from smacking you around, right? If you hit them, they're going to hit you back.
Yeah, one of the things we used to do, just for those that haven't handled a lot of explosives, like perhaps you and I have, I was a infantry guy for 7 years and taught for 3 years demolitions at the School of Infantry. Then me and Seekland, I went to combat engineer school, which is demolition heavy. So know a little bit about it, not perhaps as much as you as an EOD tech. But I will say one of the things that we used to do as an intention getter, we'd take a blasting cap, non-electrical firing system blasting cap with some det cord, and put it inside of an ammo can. And that, once it went off, this little tiny blasting cap would almost turn the ammo can inside out. Yep. And throw it 100 feet in the air, and the privates are like, holy crap.
Yeah, we used to do the same thing, but I would take a glove. I would, take like an engineer glove, because we were often dealing with the engineers. And we'd fill it with hamburger meat. Ooh. And then wrap it around a blasting cap and set it off. Same idea. And, just mangles the blasting cap.
Oh, yeah.
It just gets their attention. You say, look, don't monkey around with this stuff.
No. So a cell phone with a little bit of SimTech or Comp B or something like that is going to be more than enough to take out a terrorist. Didn't they kill a Canadian engineer that was helping? I think they smoked him in Belgium that was helping. Was it Iraq build a long range artillery?
Oh, that big, huge gun that they made?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so they kill the nuclear scientists in Tehran. So they don't shy away from doing stuff like that. But again, it tends to be very, very low conflict, under the radar. They go back and forth. They do a lot of cyber attacks on the Iranians.
Stuxnet, most recently. And for those that, there's a documentary out there you can find about it. But so allegedly, nobody's taking full responsibility for it, but allegedly from those in the know say that it was a Israeli-American attack on the Iranian centrifuges. And what a beautifully brilliant way to do it. If you haven't watched the documentary, you don't know much about Stuxnet, I highly encourage you to read about it. Absolutely masterclass. And again, this low imp, what would it be? How would you describe something like that?
Sneaky.
I
remember watching a interview with Leon Panetta on 60 Minutes talking about that, and he was kind of smiling, laughing, going, I don't know who did it, but there's only a few people in the world that could do it, a couple of countries, and you probably know which ones they are. And for those that aren't familiar, what happened was they released a virus into the software that controlled the speed of the Iranian centrifuges that they were using in their nuclear program. And they're critical pieces of equipment, and they're very hard to get, and they're very expensive, and they're very precisely engineered. And they have to spin at a particular rate.
Because they're enriching uranium with these things.
They're turning it into weapons-grade uranium. And the virus basically turned it on 11, right? Turned the thing up to 11, so they spun too fast, burned out the motors, and wrecked.
But what's interesting is, as they're spinning out of control, the worm actually that got in there, the Stuxnet, and that's not what they called it. That's what journalists or whomever have called it since. But It's telling the operators everything's fine.
Everything's cool.
Everything
Nothing to
is,
see here.
yeah,
All
perfectly with
thorough.
operating within normal operating limits. Meanwhile, on the inside, they're just tearing themselves to shreds.
Yeah.
Brilliant move.
Really slick move. Yeah, you have to. And that's the kind of thing that puts them back years, because, again, getting those centrifuges is not easy.
No. We got Bruce is on the show. Says, good morning. Coin number 481 from Michigan. Scott is on. Says, Rich, you have a farm. Do a show out there showing us some explosives. That might get a knock at my door. I don't know about that. What do you think, Dr. Fuller? Do you think they would have somebody?
Hey, you know what? If we blow up stuff in your backyard, you can't hear it from my house. Let's do it.
That's right. Rasbik is on, gold member. Thank you so much, guys. Please like and hit that share button. So, Dr. Fuller, you were just saying that normally Israel, very targeted, very surgical with how they do things. And I would submit this attack on the consulate was somewhat appropriate, given the what's going on right now.
It's in keeping with the norm, if you will.
Yeah. But Iranian really went over the.
Yeah. And now, mind you, we've got October 6th response, right? So Benjamin Netanyahu's government has signaled very clearly, in my mind, that the norm is no longer acceptable, right? Because they've typically gone tit for tat with the Palestinians as well, right? The Palestinians do something crazy. They roll in there, knock down a few houses, kill a few terrorists, scoop some people up, and then everybody goes back to neutral corners. They negotiate a settlement of peace, and they move on with things. Well, this time they're not doing that. Right. This time it's a full-on invasion of the Gaza. Well, now, and of course, there's a strong argument that the Iranians have armed and put the Palestinians up to this as another proxy attack.
100%.
So now you've got the Iranians ramping things up. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe they're testing the Iron Dome. Maybe they're hoping that the Iron Dome will run out of money or ammo. Because, let's face it, if there had been just a small glitch in the Iron Dome, and a few of those missiles had hit Tel Aviv or done some significant damage, we'd probably be having a different conversation right now.
Can we talk about that, Dr. Fuller? Because, people have a short memory shelf life here, or maybe there's some younger viewers watching. When you and I were in the Gulf War I, Saddam Hussein was doing everything in his power to launch, I don't remember how many Scuds. I don't know, hundreds. I have no idea. I'd be foolish to even try to say how many. And many of them were falling into Tel Aviv and killing Israeli citizens. And it was the international community was holding its breath and begging Israel. And I'm sure they were giving them money or God knows what to chill them out, so they would not get what Saddam Hussein wanted, which is a wider regional conflict, because that would have just torn apart the alliance that we had together there on the ground. So this is nothing new that Iran is trying to do. But the question I guess I want to ask is, given that context, Iran also said after they launched those 300 or whatever they were drones and ballistic missiles, they said, we're done. This is not the first wave of something else. We're satisfied now. Do you believe that, or what do you think?
Given the results that they got, I tend to believe it. But you don't get to make all the decisions, right? The enemy gets a vote, and the Israelis get a vote in this. I think, personal opinion, I think that they launched all these attacks hoping for a dramatic impact to galvanize others in the Islamic world, and they didn't get that. So now the best thing for them to say, the smartest thing for them to say is, that's it, we're done. That was our response. We're not going to do anything else. We're out, right? You punched me, I punched you, I'm leaving the fight. Well, the problem with that is the other guy might say, okay, you can leave the fight, but I'm going to keep punching.
Yeah.
Right. So, and in the case of the Israelis, like I was mentioning before, there's the status quo, or the sort of the norm to date, that's now been thrown out by the Netanyahu government. Now, you can say that's a good thing, it's a bad thing, whatever. I certainly understand it. I mean, the Israelis have getting poked by these people for generations, not years, not decades, generations of Israelis have been getting hit by these people over and over and over again. So there's something to be said for them just being tired of it, right? I mean, anybody here who has kids, okay? mom, right? Eventually you snap. Eventually you're just like, I've had it, right? You throw them outside, you send them to their room, you trump up some other charges, whatever you got to do, but enough. Well, this is the same thing in international politics. They didn't get any kind of a result, right? The Iranians didn't. So they're not reinforcing failure. Right? Now, had they rained down just death and destruction on Tel Aviv, I have no doubt that they would have doubled down. They would have launched more. They would have attacked harder, and they would have been sounding the clarion call to their fellow Islamists, hey, get on board. The Israelis are weak. We have to remember about Iran is that they're really trying to maneuver themselves into a position as a regional power or possibly even a superpower. I've read a few things where they're mentioning them as a potential superpower, certainly as an energy superpower. We tend to think they're the same folks they were in 79. They're not. They're just not. We've had embargoes on them for years, but I think it's like 13% of the Caspian Sea shore is in Iran.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a big lake, but it's a big lake. So they can trade with Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Russia, without anybody being the wiser. So that's exactly what's happened. They've gotten closer to the Russians, right? So they do have international trade that doesn't involve the United States. And we can't control it because it's not going through any area that we have any kind of presence on. So they don't give a rip about our influence. The other thing you got to remember is the guy that's in charge now, Khamenei, same guy that's been in charge since 1989. Okay, he was president of Iran from 81 to 89. He was an acolyte of Khomeini. So, this guy's 85 years old, 84 or somewhere in there. And he has been a hardcore Islamic theocrat his whole life. Since the 60s, since before you and I drew our first breath, Rich, this guy has been on this path. Yep. He was jailed multiple times by the Shah and his folks. He's been very clear about his position his whole life. And he's now got a government in place that sees things his way. Now, over the last 20, 30 years, we all heard about different reformists that have come in, that have become elected officials within their government. They don't tend to last. This guy does. And he is absolutely looking to have a military conflict with Israel. He wants to destroy Israel. That's been a major plank of his platform forever. Literally forever. And he's coming to the end, right? We're seeing a lot of these old folks that really need to be off the stage around the world, personal opinion, that seem to be pushing people to the brink. And I don't get it. We've got them in our government. We've got them in the Russian government. They've got them. The only ones that seem to have anybody young in charge are the Chinese. How is that a good thing for anybody? So I think the Iranians did the wise thing and said, look, we're out. We're done.
Yeah.
But I don't know that the Israelis are going to let them off the hook that easily. And the whole world is really holding their breath on this right now.
I think the paradigm has shifted, don't you? Like you said, with the October 6th response from Netanyahu being, I don't care what the paradigm has been. This is what we're doing now. And so it makes me wonder if they're going to accept the tit for tat. But at the same time, I think there's a great movie out there about the Cuban Missile Crisis. I can't remember the name of it, but it has Kevin Costner in it. And there's a situation where maybe we've mentioned it before on the show. We've got Cuba blockaded right during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and there's a Navy admiral out there. He could be the chief of naval operations. I don't know, but he basically tells them to load the 5-inch guns and prepare to fire on these things. And Robert McNamara, the actor playing Robert McNamara, is like, "What the hell are you doing?" And he's like, "Sir, the U.S. Navy's been conducting blockades since 1775. We know what the hell we're doing." It's like, this is not a blockade. This is language, right? This is political speech. The president's sending a message. We're not shooting on anybody. If we do, it's going to come from somebody much higher than you. Which is important, because one of the things I want to mention is, and this is just a blip on the radar, just a part of a sentence, but it has, to me, a language in it. And that is, one of the ballistic missiles they sent went out into orbit and then fell back down. And like, what message are you sending with that, if any? Yeah,
it's a very good point, Rich, because it is a message. People that have lived in the Middle East and dealt with Arabs, especially, and I recognize that Iranians are not Arabs, they're Persians, and they're very, very clear about that if you ever talk to them. But they're all co-religionists, right? But you talk to the folks like that over there, and saying you're going to do something in an Arab context is the functional equivalent to actually having done it in their mindset, right? So here in the West, we tend to think, well, you talk a big game, put your money where your mouth is, right? But do it. You say you're going to do it, because talking doesn't get it, right? in our perspective. But in the Middle Eastern perspective, that's different. And that's why we ended up, you remember the line in the sand, the line of death. You remember the line of death?
Oh, yeah. Gaddafi.
The Bay of Tripoli, and Gaddafi said, look, don't cross this line or you will die. It's the line of death. So, of course, what does the U.S. do?
The blood of the martyrs will wash across your shores, whatever.
And it doesn't matter that he didn't do it. It doesn't matter at all to the Arab mind. You know, they look at that and go, oh, well, look at him. He told that guy to pound sand. Yeah, he got punched in the nose for it, but he did it. He stood there, and they won't talk so much about the fact that we then splashed a couple of their jets and waltzed right across there.
Killed his daughter.
Yeah, right. They don't talk about that. They talk about the fact that he stood up to the great Satan. Well, I think some of that's going on here, right? Some of that language is going on here. Yeah, we didn't actually. They hurt a 7-year-old girl. Okay.
Yeah.
The fact is, they attacked Israel, and that's how they're going to sell it in their conversations with their co-religions that might be co-belligerents.
Do you remember, Dr. Fuller, when the Trump administration killed, who's it, Soleimani? On a very targeted drone strike right outside the, I believe it was the Baghdad airport. And Iran called Trump and said, hey, we're going to throw some missiles at you. We're going to tell you where they're going to land, so you clear your people out there, but we got to do something.
Sure.
And I wonder if this isn't the same kind of telegraphed message, specifically that they use drones, and the flight time is going to be hours to get there. Everybody can see them. Everybody and their brother can see them coming. Right. So it's like, hey, clear the way. Get your Iron Dome ready. Reload the tubes. Whatever you got to do.
Call people in off a leave.
Yes.
Lunch. Right. There's something very. I think you have a strong argument there, Rich. You really do. And the U.S. is saying, well, they didn't tell us beforehand. Okay, but we all heard the news reports. I mean, my God. Alexa in my kitchen was telling me, hey, the U.S. just warned Israel that the Iranians are about to attack. Even if the Iranians didn't send a message right to the U.S., even if they didn't use was it the Swiss that they're using as intermediaries now? If they didn't tell the Swiss, they told enough of the other Arab nations that leak like a sieve,
right?
That they knew that message was going to get across. So, yeah, and that's the thing that surprised me. It was like, oh, yeah. We were talking, you and I and Will Wood yesterday about, they've launched a drone strike. And we're like, what's the flight time? I asked. And Will says 9 hours.
Right.
Were they walking? Good Lord. Who's going to? So, yeah, I think that's a very good point. This was not a sneak attack of series of car bombs going off all over Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
Which it could have been.
Could have been. Absolutely. And maybe next time.
Because they have to rally their troops. They have to, play to their masses. A lot of this is kabuki theater, right? A lot of this is playing to the masses and sending a message to not just your own population, but to your allies, to the Russians. Hey, look, we're willing to do these things. You should give us this deal on more jets. We're willing to actually get out there and fight. We're willing to take it on the chin.
There's a couple
strong argument.
Yeah, there's a couple things also I want to ask you about. Like, I heard that it may have cost Israel as much as $1 billion with the amount of missiles that the Iron Dome had to fire to stop this. And of course, it was Jordan stopped a bunch. The U.S., the RAF over in the U.K. had some folks in theater. They were able to take some drones out. So everybody was pretty busy with those 300 plus drones. But I mean, that's a lot of freaking money, Dr. Fuller. I don't know if that number's true, but man.
Yeah, well, I mean, they spent money to do it, without a doubt. The fun part is, of course, that, one of the major pillars of Israel's economy is U.S. foreign aid.
Right.
What are we giving them? $6 billion, $7 billion a year, maybe more. I haven't checked in a while. So yeah, if they spent $1 billion, was it their money? Was it our money? Was it missiles that we gave them for free? Was even if they bought the missiles from us, it's functionally free because it's our money.
Yeah, but how long is it going to take to replace?
Yeah,
I mean, they already dumped thousands and thousands back on October the 6th. Now they just dumped a bunch too. I mean, those precision weapons, they take time.
Yeah, and they take time to build. They take time to ship. Right? It's not like you just throw them on a 747 and fly 10,000 of them over there.
No.
But of course, I'm sure that ever since October 6th, they've been buying them like mad anyhow,
sure.
Stockpiling them. And who knows how big their stockpiles are. And I'm sure the United States, being the gun runner of the world, is more than happy to sell them more or give them more, or however they're getting more of them. Or maybe they're producing them themselves. I mean, the Israelis are not incompetent.
No.
But
What?
I think the underlying concern of a larger problem in that area is heightened by this, right? We were all worried about it a little bit on October 6th. We were worried about it when the Houthis started launching on ships. Now, this isn't the Houthis and the Palestinians. I mean, these people dying is terrible, and they do have an impact on local politics, and in fact, global politics, as we've discussed here, and global shipping. But Iran changing course from their typical path and openly attacking Israel themselves is an escalation.
Yeah, you got Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis. They could have used a lot of different things to hit back at Israel relative to retaliation for the consulate hit.
It had some level of plausible deniability.
100%. But no, they chose to hit them themselves, which I think is a strong message. It's never happened before. Again, so much of what is going on in the world right now, it lacks any kind of precedent.
Yeah.
So that's why I asked you yesterday, would you get on here and talk with me about this? Because we need to remind everybody, if Israel retaliates in something other than a proportional response, and we can debate the value of a proportional response, what happens then? Because Iran how tight is their alliance with Russia? How tight is their alliance with China? Is that going to pull us into a World War III, or does it remain regional?
I like to think right now that it's going to stay regional. I mean, the U.S. doesn't have a whole lot of stomach for, coming out of 20 years of war. We don't really feel like putting troops on the ground again in that area in large scale. I'm sure SF is there now. I'm sure there are, MARSOC guys in the area. I'm sure that there are, relatively small numbers of Americans involved already. But that's different than landing the 3rd Infantry Division. And so I don't see that happening. I don't see the Russians landing troops. I just don't think they have the capability, let alone the people and the ammo. We've seen how hard they're pressed in Ukraine. I don't think that they're going to look anytime soon to run a 2-front war for Iran. But I can absolutely see them shipping arms and ammunition down there.
Can I ask a stupid question?
I doubt it, but go ahead, give it a shot.
Oh, trust me, brother. I can ask some stupid questions.
I'm not getting Miss Lisa on here to answer that.
Yeah. I guess I think back to you and I when we were discussing how quickly we thought Russia would roll through Ukraine and wrap this project up quickly. And they did. Is that because they don't have the ability to, or is that because they're wanting to keep this war limited?
I think it's because they need to keep the war limited. Right? Going in there full force, whole hog, I think exposes them in a lot of ways that they're not comfortable being exposed. Nobody on the planet right now still has that mindset that we had in World War II, right? Where we're willing to lose thousands and thousands of people in a single engagement.
Yeah.
I mean, the USS Indianapolis gets sunk as an afterthought in the war, and 800 people died. And nobody, cruiser went down. It's 800 people. Nobody bats an eye in World War II. You lose 800 people in a single incident now, and it's a political problem in the United States. I don't think Russia is far off from us in that. I think that they would have a real problem domestically if they started into a war in the Ukraine where they went whole hog and just like full on invaded, 20, 30, 40 divisions rolling into Ukraine. Also, they have other obligations, right? The Chinese are their friends, kind of. If you denude the entire defense along the Chinese border, maybe now China, is willing to dispute a little bit of territorial claim here and there. I mean, they're having territorial disputes with just about every one of their other neighbors. Why not grab some Russia while they're busy? It also makes it easier for other nations to heighten their involvement. So I think the Russians are, playing it about as hard as they can. Because let's face it, Putin is not one to shy away. If he thinks that he can get away with putting 30 divisions into Ukraine, he'll put 30 divisions into Ukraine. If he can. I don't know that he has the transport capability. He certainly doesn't have the logistics capability to keep it going. Because and I know that, right, the amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. And, just because you have a massive army doesn't mean you can feed a massive army.
Amen.
Doesn't mean you can keep them rolling down the road. Doesn't mean you can maintain those vehicles. It doesn't mean a lot of things just because you have bodies, right? I mean, this is something I think the Chinese are running into. Yes, they have a 1,000,000-man army, but can they put them all in the field at once and maintain them for more than a week? I don't know. I doubt it, especially if somebody starts shooting up their supply trains. And the Russians are lucky with the Ukraine in that they have a very short set of lines of communication, right? It's very direct. It's very easy for them to resupply, and they're still struggling. So this is another reason I don't think we're going to see Russians in large numbers rolling into Iran if it blows up.
Well, let me ask you why. Let me position it a little bit. Not that I disagree with you at all. I think you're absolutely right. However,
we're having a conversation here.
Yeah. I go back to that movie Threads, which is just a horrifying British movie. I think the BBC produced it, maybe 1980.
Thanks for inflicting that on me, by the way.
Yeah, you're welcome. But it is a nightmare nuclear scenario. And the scenario is there's some sort of Middle Eastern conflict, and Russia drops one of their airborne corps just to protect the Iranian oil fields. And you see how that kind of tumbles out of control. And here we are 44 years later, and it's not a far stretch to think something like that. And to your other earlier point about we're not prepared to take the kind of casualties, and you mentioned the Indianapolis. And I want to remind everybody, the battle for Okinawa, there was over 500,000 Americans on this tiny little island in the Ryukyu Island chain. And we lost, I'm looking at the casualty numbers here, about 84,000 casualties, of which you had, let's see here, almost 13,000 Americans dead, 153 tanks lost, 13 destroyers sunk, 15 amphibious ships sunk, 8 other ships sunk, 386 ships damaged, 763 aircraft lost. Tiny little island. And that was probably, I'm not imagining, obviously, front page news, and it just sent a message to Truman and others that, we're gonna have to use nuclear weapons on these people because they're not surrendering.
Yeah, and it's a tiny little island, let alone the mainland Japan.
If we lost one U.S. amphibious ship sunk now, let alone dozens and dozens and dozens, man, it would be, I can't even imagine.
Be a big deal. I was reading, I'm reading a series of books on the battles in Italy in World War II, because that's a 2-year fight that we know that nobody studies. And just one assault on the Monte Cassino Massif, they lost 4,000 people dead, wounded, and missing. This is the Canadians and the Brits.
Wow.
One battle, actually not even the whole battle, just a single engagement on the assault on the Monte Cassino, one little mountain. A lot of us have heard of Monte Cassino.
Oh yeah.
4,000 people.
Yeah. I didn't know it was that bad.
Yeah. Well, that was just one fight. It took months to take Monte Cassino. Months. They had to bomb the crap out of it, and the bombing was ineffective. They had, there's a whole lot of reasons, completely off topic. But my point is, the numbers that we would sustain back in those days, they're just not the same as what we'll sustain now. They just won't.
Hell no, absolutely not. I want to get to Michael Gentile's question. Michael says, this may be a great diversion for the Chinese. Ooh, what do you think, Dr. Fuller?
Well, whether the Chinese are involved in the planning and execution of it or not, the point is valid. The Chinese are not sitting there idle while all this is going on. This isn't happening in a vacuum, right? It could be a typical look at the monkey, right? While you're looking at the monkey, what are the Chinese doing? Building more islands, putting airfields and military forces on those islands. Friend of the show, Guile Jackson, who's on here quite a bit, he's down in the Philippines, as you know. He's always a good source for information as to what's going on down there, because we just don't pay attention. Right? The media is now focused on Iran and Israel with good reason. But what are the Chinese doing? They're not stupid enough to let a crisis like this go to waste. If nothing else, they're calling up the Iranians saying, hey, we've got these new missiles that you might really be interested in. Give you bargain basement prices.
Let me give you the features and benefits and the specs and see what you think. Paris is on. Paris, is good to see Mr. Fuller back on the show. Thank you so much. Yes, it's always good to sit down with my friend, Dr. Fuller. Alan says, besides from Russia, we still have to worry about China with all the countries involved in handing out aid. China is still trying to control our economy. Just this morning, a Chinese company is trying to buy U.S. steel. Big mistake if this goes through. Most of our military equipment is made of steel. You are correct. My brother Jeff is on. Good morning, sir. He says, New York nuclear response to punch back.
Yeah, let's hope not. I don't think it would be.
If those drones would have landed, and we're talking about thousands and thousands of casualties, maybe. But so far, thank God, and I hope she makes it. We have one 7-year-old girl that's been injured, right?
Yes. I was having a conversation with another AWS member, Dan Brady, yesterday, and he said, is mushroom clouds over Tehran a possibility here? And I'm like, look, if all those drones get through and they start dropping bodies in Tel Aviv, I doubt it, but them bombing the crap out of Tehran is certainly a possibility. Israel is a nuclear power. Iran wants to be a nuclear power, but they don't want to be on the receiving end of a nuclear power. And popping a nuke is a big deal, right? As we all know. I mean, that is an international huge step. It's only been done, twice before, and that was in the context of a massive world war, and it's still debated to this day. I think if Israel actually considered the use of such a thing, it would be because there was an existential threat to Israel as a nation. And right now, Iran does not present that. I mean, one of the reasons Iran doesn't get into a full-on slugging match with Israel is because they don't know if they can win one.
Yeah,
they just don't know if they can beat them.
Yeah.
And the nuke option is back there. So even if you do start to win, are you willing to let Tehran turn into a smoking hole in order to do it?
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the Israelis. If they actually invade Israel, the U.S. isn't going to just sit idly by when that happens. We're just not. Despite the fact that we have, sort of the B team, the White House.
Yeah, I read somewhere that there was a plan to potentially. You may have been the one that told me about this, Dr. Fuller, during the Yom Kippur War, to set off a nuke on a mountain, not necessarily hit anybody, but just to show that you need to back the hell off because the next one will be on your head.
Right. Next one might have a better guidance system.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it really changes the entire international dynamic. I mean, look at the Russians, right? They've had nukes since the 50s.
Uh-huh.
We all know that they have nukes, and we know that they have a greater throw weight than anybody else on the planet. But Putin feels the need to bring it up every now and then when NATO starts, tweaking his nose. Say, look, we're a nuclear power, and all options are on the table. So this is one of those things where nobody's in the West is talking about invading Russia, right? It's just not on the cards. No one's going to do that. So I don't think Iran is necessarily looking to invade Israel, pushing them into the ocean. I just don't think that's going to happen. It would take an awful lot of military force to do it. And, oh, by the way, they'd have to go through Syria because the Jordanians aren't going to let them just roll through. And you're going to see it coming, right? You're not going to invade Israel with a brigade, right? You're going to take multiple divisions, multiple corps of military conventional forces to get in there. You're going to fight every single person in that country. And at some point, they're going to say enough, and they're going to throw a nuke at you. And, oh, by the way, the U.S. is going to park a fleet off the coast, and that's going to happen. You're going to get into a tangle with a couple of U.S. carrier groups, which is no small thing. So an actual invasion of Israel, I don't see in the cards right now.
No, and I think it sends a message, too, that Jordan, helped out shooting those down. There's a really good movie out. I don't know if you've seen it, Dr. Farr, called Golda. Came out last year.
What called what? Sorry.
Golda.
Golda?
It's about Golda Meir.
Yeah, did it only come out last year? Gee, I thought that was old.
It is fantastic. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's specifically her role in the Yom Kippur War. So you can see some of the back and forth at the cabinet level, and I don't know. It's fantastic, but I think we tend to forget about that. And you also see how Kissinger comes over and kind of talks to Golda, and it's really interesting. Let's get to Mark's comment here. We all know too, never start a fight you can't win. Do less experience comes understand this.
Yeah, that's a valid question. But I
But
mean,
isn't it back to Arab mind? And I say this because most Marine battalion commanders made their NCOs and above read the book, The Arab Mind, before they deployed to the Middle East during the GWAT. And I think that's important.
my copy's back here on the shelf.
Okay.
Yeah, Arab mind, and let's again back to Kamani's age. He's 85, and he's been a religious zealot for what, 75 of those years?
Yeah.
That's a factor, right? I mean, well, how would we all feel if there was a guy in the White House that was all about bringing on the rapture? Who had quotes from the Book of Revelation on his wall behind him? It'd be a concern, right? It'd be a real concern, because you wonder, where's this guy's head? All right, so we got an 85-year-old religious zealot in charge of a huge theocracy running the show over there. Yeah, and again, they don't see things the way we see. So to your point, again, they're not an Arab country, but the Arab mindset does apply in large part to the Iranians. Yeah. Just the fact that they attempted it, even if they lose, right? They still gain face, to use the Japanese term.
Let's talk about that real quick, because during the first Gulf War, I think we, being the Marine Corps, I'll speak only for the 2nd Marine Division, we killed a lot of people that probably didn't need to be killed, simply because we didn't understand that the Iraqis had this honor thing where, as we're rolling through, before they would surrender, they're going to fire a burst in the air, invert sling their weapon, and walk toward us with their little surrender leaflet in their hand. Well, we see rounds going off, and we just start schwacking dudes. Yep. But to them, it's like, well, I'm shooting in the air. You can see the tracer, or no, I'm about to surrender. To us, it's like, no, bro, you're ready to fight. And Marines came to fight, so we're here. Let's do this. Right. And so we just didn't understand the mentality. If we had, they're going to fire off some rounds, and then we know they're going to walk out of the trench. Instead, fire some rounds, and we're going to send in a Hellfire missile to deal with it.
Or we'd have written our pamphlets differently.
Right, exactly.
Don't come out with it. What do we tell people in law enforcement? Don't come out of the building when our barricaded subject's going to surrender. Leave your gun behind. Don't have anything in your hands, because if you do, you run a risk of getting shot. And that's for civilian law enforcement in domestic context. You take a whole bunch of hard dick pipe swingers or pipe hitters, put them in a desert for 9 months, and then you run them north and say, look, if it's north, they're bad guys and they're shooting. There's no question here. Right. It's all over, pal.
It is.
You're lucky if all I do is machine gun you. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I understand what you're saying. I almost got into it with some Bedouins at a wedding. I might have told you this before, coming outside of Kuwait City. Yeah, there was a wedding, and we're rolling along, and it's me and a couple of my NCOs and a driver in a Humvee. And all of a sudden, we start seeing those freaking tracers flying through the sky, and just bail out of the vehicle. Everybody's running. We're assaulting two-man buddy team assaults into automatic fire, because the rounds weren't coming at us, but they were up in the air. And we go around the corner, and we're getting ready to just lay down some hate and destruction, and it's a freaking wedding. They're all out there dancing, and they're in their man jammies, and they're firing weapons in the air. I was pissed. So
every night, brother, back then.
Right? Stop that.
I know, but you got to understand the mentality of the people we're dealing with, and that's what Jeff says. People should read The Appalachian Mind, the Scots Irish. Yeah, we're not that far removed from this.
Different language.
Yeah, different language, but it's the same culture of honor, and you have to be, you have to understand what you're dealing with here. So I'm hoping that by Iran clearly saying we're done, no mas, that Israel's response, if any, will be relative to that.
Yeah, and there's nothing that says the Israelis can't get on the bat phone and call up Tehran and say, look, we understand you're done. We're not looking to escalate this, but you're gonna get spanked.
Yep.
Right? Same thing you do to your children, if you think about it. Look, I get it. You screwed up. You're sorry. You shouldn't have done that. You understand you shouldn't have done that. Got it. You still are getting punished. Right? Because you need to be very clear on the idea that this is not acceptable. And oh, by the way, your brothers and sisters need to see that you didn't get away with it. Right? Because the Israelis aren't just concerned with the Iranians. Certainly they're chief amongst equals now, but they've got to make sure to send a message to everyone that you don't get to do this to us without suffering some level of consequence.
Yeah.
I had heard a rumor that the power went out all over Tehran as soon as the drones went up, but I haven't been able to confirm that. Have you seen it anywhere?
I have heard that as well, and don't know what that means. If it's again, I think a lot of this is, and of course, it's von Clausewitz's war is politics by other means, and he's absolutely right. So I think a lot of this is political speech. Oh, you launched some drones? Watch this. Blink, I turn your power off. How'd you like that? And oh, the power came back on. Yeah, exactly. I can turn it off anytime I want to. And that does send us a strong message. If you look, I've read some reports that we hadn't dropped any. You know what a Blue 82 is, a daisy cutter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it's, for those that don't Blue 82 is like the largest non-nuclear weapon in the U.S. arsenal. At least it was back in the day. I don't know. They may have something the Moab now,
The
maybe.
Moab.
Yeah. Yeah. The mother of all bombs. But we did this thing where in the Gulf War, they dropped leaflets and said, hey, tomorrow at this grid coordinate, we're going to drop the largest non-nuclear weapon. We're going to do it exactly this time so that you can set your watch by it. Wham! And they dropped the daisy cutter, and then they dropped leaflets the next day. Hey, see how we can control the skies? We do what we say we're going to do. We're going to do it again. And I think that sends a psychological message to your enemy, like, oh my God, that they control the battle space of 100%. So something like if they did turn the lights off in Tehran, man, what a powerful message that would send.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you turn off the power. It's not just, as you point out, it's not just the lights. Now all of a sudden your water's not flowing. Your computers aren't on, right? Your air conditioning in your bunker 75 feet below the Capitol building isn't working, right? There's a significant impact in the modern age to losing power. And to be able to do it at will to your opponent.
Did you read that book, Relentless Strike? I think it was Sean Naylor.
No, I did not.
About JSOC.
Mm-mm.
Fantastic book. And one of the things that he talks about is one of the JSOC missions for CAG and DevGru was, how do we get into those Iranian bunkers? So they trained for years, and I don't know if they still do, on, acetylene torches and oxygen and all this stuff and cutting through reinforced steel and stuff like that to get in there. So they're practicing for that scenario, but it's so much easier to just a few keystrokes on a board and go, yeah, I'm going to put you in the dark for a while.
Right. I'm going to turn off your air handling systems and your elevators. See how you do now.
Exactly.
But, those kind of breaches are no joke. I mean, I had a friend who was on the breaching team that hit the prison down in Atlanta back in, I guess it was the 80s, early 90s, and they had the big prison riots.
Yeah.
And they had to go into a federal prison and they had to breach it. And the conversations were, do we breach the doors that are designed not to be breached? Or is it just easier to breach the reinforced concrete walls that are, 6 feet thick or whatever?
Walls.
And, so there's actual conversations about that.
Hey, and having been on a prison special operations team, we have ways to get around inside that prison. Let's just put it that way, where breaching may not be necessary. And I think that's why the way they're building them these days, to allow us to have certain access ways into different pods. I won't really say much more than that, but yeah, it's a problem.
Yeah. So let's hope it doesn't get to the point where Israeli special forces or U.S. special forces, even worse, are landing in Tehran trying to get into these bunkers. But plans exist, I have to believe.
So give me this. I think I've kept you on here for almost an hour this morning, Dr. Fuller. I'd like to ask you two potential scenarios, one of which is, what is the most likely scenario that Israel will carry out? And then based on that most likely scenario, what are the regional and world implications of that scenario?
Well, good questions. And if I could answer those with any level of accuracy, I'd probably be on a much bigger platform having these conversations. Mm-hmm. My guess is that the Israelis are going to respond because I think they have to. I think from a political perspective, they have to. I think from where Netanyahu sits, he has to keep his coalition intact, keep his government intact. I think he has to. I think it's going to have to be constrained, though, especially in light of the Iranians coming out and say, we're done. I'll be free. But I think they're going to have to respond, and I think it will be commensurate. I think it will be much more accurate and effective a response than their 300 failed drones.
Mm-hmm.
Using that number, I understand, like you said, it may or may not be accurate. I think you're going to see some people that are in significant positions of authority in their military and possibly even in their civilian government are going to get unalived, as the phrase goes these days. And I think some of their infrastructure is going to take a beating. What exactly that looks like, that's a tactical decision that the Israelis will have to come up with. And I'm sure they have. I'm sure there's meetings going on right now. So, well, we got target package A, we got target package B, we got a buffet here, sir. What would you like to pick from? I think that's pretty much how it's going to go. And the funny part about all that is I don't think the Iranians have boo to say about it. They're just not going to stop. They do not have an Iron Dome, right? They don't have the capability to stop the Israelis the way the Israelis just stopped them. So it's going to happen. It's just a matter of whether it is a dramatic. I think it has to be fairly dramatic. I think going out and assassinating a half a dozen people quietly in the next 6 months is probably not the response that you're going to see.
No.
Now, what does that do? Well, if they come out right afterwards and say, okay, we're done, maybe that takes the wind out of the sails of the Iranians. You say, okay, well, let's all retreat back to neutral corners. I think the Iranians have already gained the political ground that they needed to gain, or that they wanted to gain by doing that. Now they can go back to their Houthi allies. They can go back to their Palestinian allies and say, hey, look, we're right there with you, pal. We hit too. We struck too. And that's what I was saying earlier about the actual efficacy of that attack is less of a concern than the fact that they did it. So the conversations will be, they don't have to listen to the Palestinians and say, well, we're taking it on the chin for you and you're not doing squat, man. Come on.
Right.
They can actually say, no, we attacked.
Yep.
They can go to the Houthis and say the same thing. Keep it up, boys. Here's some more missiles. We got your back. We're attacking Tel Aviv. 300 missiles flew, and by the grace of Allah. So that's how that conversation is going to go.
Maybe I'm asking the wrong. This is what pains me, man. And this is not just a Eastern thing. Hell, this is America's, where we have been since the advent of the Cold War. What is the damn end state they're going for? And I mean, they being Iran, or they being Israel? Is it really a quid pro quo, tit for tat? You stole my camel, I'll take 2 of your goats kind of bullshit? I mean, it's just what's the end state they're driving
functional
for?
Equivalent of stealing cattle in northern Scotland, the Highlands of Scotland.
Exactly, right? Yeah.
I think for the Israelis, it's national defense and getting reelected. Right? That's how politicians think. I think for the Iranians, they're angling for superpower status. They're angling for influence status, right? They've heightened their connections with a lot of their neighbors over the last 15, 20 years. They're trying to strengthen those bonds. They're trying to widen their influence. And having a military capability that they're willing to use is part and parcel of that. But like you said, it's language. There's also diplomacy going on. There's trade going on. For all I know, they've got artists in residence at different countries. So I think they're trying to heighten their influence around the region and around the world. I mean, notice none of us are talking right now about Burundi, right?
No,
we're not. We're talking about Iran. So Iran is on everyone's lips. Iran is being spoken of in openly and in hushed tones in the corridors of power around the world. That's part and parcel of having influence, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what Iran is after. They're not after getting Tehran carpet bombed. They're not after the U.S. knocking over their entire infrastructure and turning off the lights permanently. They're not after that at all. They're after being able to, look at the Syrians and say, look, you're going to do this and this and this. And they'll do it. They're looking to have that level of influence on a resurgent Iraq whenever they get their act back together. In Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, they're looking to have that regional influence. And smacking Israel around is a good way for them to do that. They can't necessarily smack Syria around. They're certainly not going to attack the Russians. They can't attack us very effectively. And that's a bad idea.
That's a great point. A lot of people forget that, the elements of national power are best expressed by an acronym DIME, D-I-M-E, diplomacy, intelligence / information, military, and economics. And I would like to see, I'm gonna track it a little bit and see what this does relative to Iranian currency.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Because
get World Wood back in here.
Yeah, I mean, but I mean, you would imagine that all fiat currency would fluctuate with something like this. And like I said, if everybody's talking about Iran, wow, what a strong message. Do we see that relative to their economy?
Yeah, I mean, it's just see what happens with the BRICS idea too after this.
Yeah. Okay, so last question, I think. I want to circle back to the one thing I mentioned, and that is that they sent one of their ballistic missiles into orbit. Now, they put it on a trajectory where it was fall back in Israel, but once it's in orbit, they can send it anywhere. So again, I think that maybe this was a great opportunity to go, hey, check this out. You guys, NORAD, were you tracking that one? Oh, look at it. Yeah, where's it going? Oh, okay, it's coming down. I mean, I think that sends a pretty powerful message, and it gave them a perfect opportunity to show, guess what I can do, guys.
Yeah, you mentioning it this morning was the first I'd heard of that particular piece.
Like I said, it was just one little sentence fragment, but I think it has major implications.
It does. I mean, because the science it takes to launch a ballistic missile, and oh, by the way, they had one that was functioning and functioned as designed, apparently, that the Israelis didn't shut down, and we didn't shut down. Because that's the difference between dropping Scud missiles on Tel Aviv and potentially dropping V2 rockets on London again.
Yeah, because you're outside the bounds of gravity, man. I can make that damn. Once I get it into orbit, I can put it anywhere I want, anywhere on the globe I want. I'm not constrained by gravity, like you said, pulling it to the ground 400 miles or something like that.
Yeah, so if that is the case and they're suddenly able to reach out all around the world, then I think it's even more important to keep them from becoming a nuclear power anytime soon.
100%. 100%.
It's a wild time, but if I could be permitted one more thing,
please.
This entire thing, in my mind, underscores the general instability we're seeing around the world. Right, we're seeing instability in a lot of areas, in a lot of places, that most of which we've discussed here on this show. That doesn't just affect the people in Israel. Right. It's not just the people on the beach in Eilat that are having a problem here. It's not just the people in Tehran that are having a problem here. These levels of instability ripple across an increasingly interconnected world, and they will land in some visible way, shape, and form in the communities of the AWS members.
Yeah.
Now that may be a big deal. It may be a small deal, but it's part of the deal. And it behooves all of the membership, in my mind, to pay attention to these things, because it does have an impact. This is not happening in a vacuum. It is going to have an impact on us here, and being informed of these incidents around the world and trying to war game it out in our own minds and making our own decisions based on the information that we have is a requirement. And I think it's a good idea for the American Warrior Show to keep doing what it's doing and keeping its membership advised to these things so that they can be prepared, so that they don't get hit by surprise.
That is such a poignant thing to say, especially relative to such a porous southern border. I mean, we have absolutely zero clue. There was, I don't know if you saw this over the weekend, but there's a new section of the wall that's down in the Tijuana area. And, Tijuana is as third world as they come. I love Tijuana, by the way. I spent a lot of time down there. But I mean, they're just streaming through. So again, how do we not know, to the poisoned M&M theory, how many of those may or may not be sleeper agents? And oh, by the way, if I'm Tehran, like, hey man, US, you better chill on this, because whether you know it or not, I got 371 dudes scattered all over across the US ready to walk into supermarkets with some Simtex. I mean, you just never know.
You don't. And they could have all kinds of the invisible jobs, right? They're custodians at airports, in schools, the guy picking up your trash. There's plenty of jobs out there that they can get, that people will hire them, that are ubiquitous. They give them all kinds of levels of access and put them in places where they can have hugely damaging impact.
Yeah, I mean, look at the two places they sent most of the Iraqi refugees was Nashville and Knoxville, Tennessee. So if you go to BNA or TYS, these two airports, all the workers there that have credentials, badges, walking in and out of the secure areas are Iraqi. And again, the poison M&M theory is well in effect.
And they don't even all have to be sent here by the central government specifically to be sleeper agents, because they're all, their version of the CIA, direct response teams. You'd be just regular people that got here, and it didn't turn out to be as great a deal as they thought it was going to be, as we've discussed on this show before. And they become radicalized and violent.
Bingo. Because I don't know what mosque they're going to. I'm not in the mosque. Are you? No. So I don't know what's being told. And maybe they came over here hoping for the big land of the big PX and live the American dream. And since they've been here, they've been a baggage handler and they're pissed off. Yeah.
And they're only a baggage handler because the $10,000 a month debit card that they were promised never materialized. Yeah. And all the freebies dried up because the U.S. economy can't afford to support them anymore. Right.
So again, there's a lot of ways people can be radicalized. I mean, who was that? Anwar al-Awlaki? I can't remember the one that was radicalizing Americans. I'm screwing up these names here, but
I mean, that's honestly why a lot of the big names end up in Colorado, in the supermax out there, just to keep them from having, keep their influence as small as possible.
Yeah.
If you put some of these guys in Gen Pop in a 10,000 man prison somewhere, what's the impact of that? Go ahead.
No, Dr. Fuller, please.
No, it says now radicalized Americans are getting out, and they're U.S. cits. Even if they're convicted felons, they still have a larger and larger impact. It's a very dangerous time because it's an unstable time. Stability is good for everybody. It's unstable right now. The world is unstable. And we've talked about before. It just feels like a lot of people are looking for a fight.
I know.
And I'm not just talking about nation states. I'm talking about people on the street. People are just angry. And I think that comes back to people are scared and they're worried. And it's translating in some people to anger. And that means that there will be a subset of those folks that will translate to violence. And to think otherwise is to ignore thousands of years of human history. It's coming down the pike, folks. So keep your head on a swivel.
Yeah, that's so true. And to your point about, radicalizing in prisons and things of this nature, man, that is so true. Read the book, The True Believer by Eric Hoffer. We've talked about it quite a bit on the show. And thank you to my friend Michael Gentili, who's on this one. He's the one that turned me on to it probably 24 years ago. I read it, man. And it is as true today as it is now. And it's about radicalizing people, the kind of people that can be radicalized. I mean, look at Northern Ireland. If you're a poor Irish kid with no hope, no future, you're fodder for somebody telling you to throw a bomb into this Protestant pub. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not a Middle Eastern problem, guys. This is a problem that's a human problem, right?
It absolutely is. I mean, you take downtrodden people and they become a fertile recruiting ground for all kinds of isms, right? I mean, Ireland has traditionally been strongly Catholic, strongly Protestant. So you've got religious isms that have gotten into those folks and helped them out in their minds. But you have cynical people all over the world that go to these refugee camps that pop up and recruit people because they are in a position where they are easier to recruit. There's a reason that Nazi Germany popped up in Germany in the Weimar Republic. The country was on its fiscal knees. Uh-huh. And there were a lot of people that were desperate for something better and desperate for someone to blame. And there's always going to be some cynical jackass that's going to come along and say, who's responsible for this? The Brown family. Uh-huh. It's those guys that put you in this position. And we can only get our autonomy back and our pride back and our money back if we wipe out the Browns. Uh-huh. And let's go start with that rich Brown guy down the street. Let's go throw a rock through his window.
Good luck with that.
But you see what I'm saying?
100%.
It's a human condition. It's in Israel. It's in Iran. It's in Pakistan. It's in India. You pick a place. Find downtrodden people, and you will find people that are recruiting out of there. Yeah. The people that attacked the hotel in India several years ago, largely recruited in Pakistani refugee camps and downtrodden, economically repressed communities. Some of them are renowned for putting bodies into these madrasas and putting them into these terrorist organizations. The town is known as a hotbed of recruiting and hotbed of recruitment. I know there are places in Northern Ireland that are the same way.
Yeah.
So,
And I tell you, having been a recruiter, obviously for a long
just
14
not for a
years.
terrorist organization.
Yeah, just
Depending
not
on
for,
perspective.
well,
Yeah,
we
that's
cause a
kind of
little
our
terror.
story. Yeah.
But I looked at myself, and this is going to sound bad, and I may have to delete this later, but I looked at myself like a virus. I want to self-replicate in any community they send me to, right? I'm serious. And the best way to
Okay.
do that is I did targeted recruitment. Like the chief of police's daughter, bang. The mayor's son, bang. The vice principal of the local high school, his son, who just happened to be a star football player. And then I got a bunch of his football player buddies. And then next thing you know, we've got a color guard at the high school Marine Corps color guard at the high school graduation. And that's the way I thought. I'm like, I will be victorious here if they're flying the Marine Corps flag on the high school field instead of the American flag. And I set about every single day to do that and enact my will on that community by turning them into Marines. Now, again, that's so if I'm thinking that way, you don't think somebody that believes the Quran with their heart and soul isn't doing the same damn thing?
Yeah, it's true, and it works, right? You find it's almost a recipe.
Mm-hmm.
You find these people that are desperate, that have few to no options, and you go after them. And you'll get a percentage. I'm sure that the Marine Corps calculated out the percentage. Okay, we have a community of 100,000, of which, on average, it will have this many recruitable age people, and of those, this is a percentage that we can reasonably expect to recruit, and therefore this is your goal, Warrant Officer Brown. Your people have this much of a population to recruit from. You will recruit this many people this year because historically speaking, that's what we can get.
I've talked about it before. Every year, Congress releases this thing called Memo 1. Memo 1 comes out. We look at the data, and based upon the end strength of the Marine Corps, we reverse plan and say, okay, therefore, X number are going to retreat from recruit training. X number we're going to retreat from the fleet during the first 4-year enlistment. In order to achieve an end state of X, we're going to need to put so many bodies into the pipeline, right? And based on that, we need to make X number of phone calls. We need facilities here. But it's based like on male high school senior population. And you're absolutely right. And every year when Memo 1 comes out, all of us that are at that level sneak our way down to the La Pavilion Hotel. I'm giving up the goods here in New Orleans. And we have a 2 or 3 day conference just to tinker with the math on how we're going to do this mathematically, because, and this is the point that getting back to this is, there's a propense population in the South Bible Belt, maybe economically disenfranchised relative to, say, California or the Northeast, that has a more likelihood of joining the military than anywhere else in America.
Sure.
And because of that propense population, we in the South have to push back, because the recruiting in the Northeast and the recruiting in California are like, you guys can take on more contracts. But I say that because the Islamic recruiters know the same thing. They know where the propense population is.
Yep.
Like you said, the refugee camps and some of these other places, and you don't think they're putting their radicalizing folks into those mosques that are serving that community?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I will tell you, even in my own experience, I grew up, and I don't talk about it on here very much, but I grew up in a very broken home, really shattered, very economically repressed. Nobody had any money, and my options were slim going up. And I joined the military. I joined the Army. One, because look at all that money. Oh my, how much do I get paid every month? Oh my God. And because it was an option to get out of my underclass existence.
Uh-huh.
And they gave me, it was a good mix too. It wasn't just money. It was travel. It was 18, right? Oh, you want to jump out of planes and run around with machine guns and rappel off of helicopters. And ooh, wow, this is cool. Wow, this sounds good. Recruiting someone into a terrorist organization is no different. You give them all those cool things they can do. And because you're not recruiting me as a 55-year-old guy, 56-year-old guy, the things you would have to tell me to get me to join that organization, vastly different than what you had to tell me at 18.
100%.
Right? You got to start talking about, thread count, and you got to start talking about slippers and
Egyptian cotton.
Right. Yeah. Egyptian cotton. Right. You can't be talking to me about swans. I don't want to hear about swans.
Uh,
So you're right. These recruiters in any of these terrorist organizations, wherever they are on the planet, are no different. And they're out there in force. And it seems like these days, to my earlier point, people are looking for a fight. They're looking to get in a tangle. People feel like they don't have a whole lot of options, that the fight is inevitable, that they don't want to be on the wrong side of that, or maybe they want to get into it because they're 17 or 18 and they've grown up with stories of my dad and my uncle were mujahideen and they were martyrs, and my dad's been singing "Come Out Ye Black and Tans" to me since I was in a crib, whatever it is. So now you're at that age where you're like, well, I got to go out there and prove myself. And here comes a guy with a very slick story and a cool song about Tripoli,
Amen.
Next thing you know, you're floating on a boat somewhere in the middle of the Pacific.
There's a out there right now. There was a kid that nobody could recruit this guy, but he and so they almost threw him at me as a challenge when I first got that book. I'll just say his first name, Anthony. He says, everybody's talked to Anthony. We think he'd be a good Marine. He just doesn't know it yet. I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, I'll take a swing at this kid. So he comes in, and good looking kid, bald head, really, really, really fit, and takes a lot. I could tell immediately, like his eyebrows are kind of touched up and earrings are just right, and he's very, very fit and buff, shredded. And so I said, you know what, Anthony, man, I'm not going to give you the song and dance. You've heard that shit already by these guys. Here's what I'm going to do. Come here. I take him in the bathroom. I said, put this on. I gave him my dress blues blouse, and he buttons it up. He's like, oh, man, damn, I look good. I'm like, yeah. I take my fucking jacket off.
You haven't earned that.
Exactly. And I'm like, the next time you put one on, pal, you're going to earn it. That's all I got. That's the pitch. Here's my card. Call me. Anyway, he ended up being radio recon inside the Marine Corps, got out, and is now flying Blackhawks for the Army as the chief warrant officer. So, it's knowing the right button to push or the right kid. But to Mark's point, it's just hungry people are always dangerous and recruitable.
Yep.
One final comment here. Gilly says, I got radicalized to join AWS because Mike Seeklander was teaching us to shoot. Rich Brown was giving us a lot of good shows. Willwood was giving us intelligent views and a tinfoil hat. And Dr. Fuller is giving great stories and sharing great experiences. And he has a great looking leather jacket.
He's not wrong.
He ain't wrong.
Can't fault the man's taste.
Yeah. Dr. Fuller, any closing thoughts, my friend?
No, Rich, it's a wild time. There's that old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. We live in interesting times, folks. You really do. And this is, the really scary thing about it is it may not be too long before we're looking at today as the good old days. Mm-hmm. So as we often say here, the fight's coming. Be ready.
It most certainly is. Thank you to the 11 folks that are still on with us. Hey, tomorrow, Dr. Fuller, me, and our good friend, attorney Andrew Branco is going to be on. We're going to be talking about the Apple River stabbing. The verdict is in, folks. Mr. Mew was found guilty on all accounts. So if you want to hear about that breakdown on what I think, is just a chilling self-defense verdict, then please tune in tomorrow. It's going to be at 10 o'clock Central, 11 Eastern, 9 Mountain. And if you want to hear Dr. Fuller and attorney Andrew Branca talk about the Apple River stabbing, got a special show for you tomorrow. Andrew was kind enough to come on. So is Dr. Fuller's coming on. So I really want you to get that. I'll post the event later in the show so that everybody can get the notification. But if you're on with us now, you got a sneak peek that it's coming, right?
Absolutely. And let's not forget, Andrew watched that entire trial, every minute of it. So you're not going to get anybody with a better perspective on it vis-a-vis self-defense than Andrew Branca, because he is the man when it comes to self-defense law in this country. And for his critique of that trial and all the elements of it, I really don't think, Rich, you could find a better person to discuss it.
100% agree with you. And he was texting me while we were on. So there might be, I might have a special offer for you guys tomorrow. So tune in to find out more about that. Dr. Fuller, sir, you want to take us out?
As we've said many, many times, folks, you've heard it here often, and it's nonetheless true. The fight is coming. Be ready.